This is White Centipede Noise Podcast, where we give language to noise. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Iggor Cavalera, the founding drummer of pioneering extreme metal band Sepultura from Brazil. Iggor has a long history in extreme music, and in recent years has become involved in the noise underground, releasing and performing a blend of experimental electronics and percussion, and collaborating with noise artists. He is currently on a solo tour through Europe. This interview was conducted in person before his show in Berlin. White Centipede Noise Podcast and WCN TV is long-form, in-depth content focused exclusively on noise, based out of WCN Studios in Potsdam, Germany. To check out our archive of podcast episodes and WCN TV content, and to support this operation, visit patreon.com/whitecentipedeNoise. This episode is sponsored by Rural Isolation Project. Visit ruralisolationproject.com or ruralisolationproject.bandcamp.com to order, or look out for them at a distro near you. Iggor,
how are you, brother?
Very good. Very nice to meet you.
Yes, I'm glad we got to do this. You know, finally we connect to do this. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of the show. I've been following what you do for quite a while. So a lot of interesting topics, interesting people, and I think it's very well curated, man.
Thank you. It means a lot. You're a real deal musician, you're a real deal artist, and you're from the underground, but you're also not from only, you're not directly from the noise underground. So like, it's really cool to connect and hear from you that you're, checking into what I'm doing from a totally different place. And that's really, that means a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important, I think the noise scene in general, I like the variations of it. I like, where certain things meet in between worlds, not only musically, but also like in the arts. And I can see, a lot of people that you interview, they do travel between those worlds,
right.
Not only music, but sometimes, like with sonic explorations that cannot be called like just music for the sake of music, but more of as an ideal. So I find that quite interesting. That's what attracts me the most.
Yeah.
It's like when a scene it's somehow mutating.
Yeah.
I like that.
You've been involved, like we know, in underground music since
early 80s. Man.
Early 80s.
Yeah, like I started out with Sepultura with my brother in 83, and then by 84 we released our first record. And to be quite honest, like what we did at the time, like it was a very extreme form of music, and to play that style of aggressive metal in a place like Brazil, it was quite, of course, in different places of the world those things were happening. You had artists like Throbbing Gristle and doing extreme things.
Yeah.
And I guess we were doing our part in South America by releasing those styles of music.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, there is a certain also individual spirit that comes from that part of the world when it comes to extreme music. I mean, like other extreme music that comes from there has a very, also certain unique and raw energy. There's not that much noise that I'm aware of that comes from, that world, but there is some, and
yes.
You've even like pointed me towards some. You pointed me to a dude named Jesus Cremoso.
Yes. He's a very cool artist from São Paulo.
Yeah.
And he's more of like I would say a little newer.
Yeah.
But it's always been noise-related projects in Brazil. Like even, to be quite honest, one of the first noise things I heard, it was a Brazilian project that did a split with a hardcore band. Mm-hmm. And it was called Brigada do Ódio, like Hate Brigade.
Cool.
And that was, I think, 1982.
Wow. Yeah.
The record.
Yeah.
And one side of the split, it's like a D-beat punk band, which is Olho Seco. Mm-hmm. And then Brigada do Ódio, it was pure noise. Like the whole side, it was just this harsh, like violent thing. And I remember listening to that and just being like very confused but also very attracted. And I think that's also the difference. When people appreciate noise, it doesn't scare.
Yeah.
It's like you find ways of listening and discovering nuances. And sometimes even, in my opinion, I find it's almost like drugs. I hallucinate sonically when I hear certain tapes and I'm like, am I really hearing this?
Right.
And I don't even know if I showed to someone if they will hear the same things.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Where for a lot of people, if they listen for 2 minutes of that, they will be like freaked out and they're like, why are you listening to this? You know? And I find quite meditative, like almost like a meditation, you know, and
It's a question of perception, I think. I mean, really, you know, like, I talk about this a lot, is like, I think the fact that it's called noise and we have this idea that it's scary or whatever, that people think directly they have to react to it in a certain way. But I think if you approach it with an open mind, or without this sort of like filter, you can perceive the sound in many different ways than that.
Yeah, and I think that's also, it might be, in my opinion, why the Japanese also have such an attraction for it, because I believe they might not have those filters as we do in the Western world. Like we're learned by an early age that anything that it's a bit aggressive, we should hide.
Right.
And then of course also we find attraction to that.
Yeah.
Maybe by also those ideas of like, don't listen to that. And then I remember as a kid, if anybody told me not to watch a certain movie, I wanted to watch that.
For sure.
You know, if they said this movie's way too violent, I would be like, oh yeah, I'm watching this tonight.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure.
So I guess that taboo also plays a big part in our attraction to this style of music.
Definitely does. Brazil is at its core a very Catholic country, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of the extreme Brazilian metal and things like that, and extreme, seems to have like a really strong fixation with like blasphemy, and like that's a really that must have been a pretty extreme thing to do. I mean, now in Europe or in America or maybe in Brazil nowadays, it's like so mainstream now to like, you know, be like worship the devil, cross upside down or whatever. But I'm sure at some time in certain cultures that was really like,
well, that's the thing.
It's dark thing.
It's a good point you're putting, because even for us explaining the first wave of black metal that we had in Brazil, it wasn't really about worshiping Satan, but it was about attacking the church, which has a huge difference. Right. For us, it was way more political, because the church is controlling everything in South America, and like they're involved in politics, as we all know. They're the most evil thing, you know. Like they came in and they really raped the land with like, you know, the colonization and everything. So for us to go against the church, it was an act of rebellion. And for us, it also made more sense to attack that than just attack the government in general, because they're the same thing in our view. So when you had the Sex Pistols going like against the Queen, for us, our form of aggression was like, no, let's destroy the church. Because they're all connected. So I guess that's where it kind of like blurs, where we also never been Satan worshipers. You know, like that wasn't our thing. Like, of course, I study a lot of like the dark side of things. I read a lot of books, but I was never, because I believe they're all the creation of the same thing. The evil and the good, and Satan, in my opinion, is also a creation of the church.
Right, absolutely.
So for us to worship that, it was almost like, how come you don't accept Jesus, but you accept that one, which is kind of like, they're the yin yang, you know?
It's fully built, still buying into that system.
Yeah, so that's where that movement started from. It was about that aggression, and then of course, musically, it was an extreme form of showing how we wanted to rebel. And then of course, like metal, by being one of the styles that we liked the ideas, but we didn't like how metal was made in Europe or in America, because it was too polished, and they were talking about dragons and slaying, like castles, and we're like, that's not our reality, So I guess that's where it started.
In the last few years, at least to my knowledge, you've kind of really become involved in like the noise underground. You've done a handful of releases of noisy experimental music, but I assume you've been kind of involved in and listening to like noise and electronic music for a long time. So what's your kind of background into the more pure kind of like experimental electronic side of things?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because like you said, I've been really into the whole noise. I don't know if we can call it a scene, but I experienced coming from different places, like Europe, Japan, of course the UK, and only in the last few years I became a little more open about releasing stuff that I do. I always have a studio. I always had stuff that I record and collaborate with different people. But I was a bit more protective of the stuff. And then maybe with COVID, I kind of like opened myself up of being a bit more free about things, where, I don't know, it's less of an ego thing, but it's just releasing stuff and let those things leave. And whatever happens, you can affect 5 people, you can affect 1,000 people, or you can't affect no one.
Right.
And it doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's where that comes from, that situation where during the COVID, I thought a lot about those things, and I was like, I should be a bit more free about it, not so protective and not so anal about, oh, it should be like this, it should be this label. I was a bit too, I don't know, not so free about it. And then during COVID, I started to think of like, wow, actually the artists that I like, they don't care.
Right.
They just release stuff, you know, like someone like Ramirez, for example, or even like Merzbow, you know. There's so much, you can't even keep up with it, you know, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it is an exercise as well of let go things, instead of being like, oh, I have a million things on my hard drive that I've been saving for years.
Right.
What for?
Yeah.
Like, who's gonna listen to this? I don't wanna just have that as a treasure, you know, put it out. So I guess that's where, but going back a bit into the question, I always had a fascination with noise. And I guess it started even before I started to realize that there was a scene that was for this. Like even in certain old movies when I was younger, when they had like some harshness, I always felt very attracted to it. And instead of, like we say, instead of being opposed to it or even scared, for me, I was like, wow, I really like, you know, like a lot of people, there were certain bands that they would do like a noise intro.
Right, yeah.
And I would be like, I wish that would go a little longer than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I guess this is, you know, like one of those things where, yeah, I always felt a big connection, you know, even like with my drumming and the way I played with Sepultura, I always had in the back of my mind the experimental sides of things, always pushing boundaries to do things in a different way. And maybe that's why Sepultura became such a big project. It was because of us being a little more open-minded than a lot of the metal guys. You know, like the typical guys would be only segregated to one style, and if you move a little, you sell out. And
yeah, sure. When did you start working with experimental electronics or noise, or even on your own, like experimenting?
I mean, I did a project with my brother that it wouldn't consider noise, but it was experimenting with a bit of the industrial side of things called nail bomb, and that was in the early '90s, and that was a bit of a flirting a little more with coming out of like the typical drums, guitars, and like adding samples, sampling things like field recording.
Yeah.
And I've been collecting field recording and not field, but recordings in general for years, like to the point that I have a very vast collection of samples that I have stuff from the Amazon. I have stuff from first time I went to Tokyo recording like the chaos, and from many different places, you know, to the point that I'm doing a release with Masami, with Merzbow.
Cool.
And our first conversation was about that. He asked me if I had anything that I record with the tribe when we did Roots. And I was like, actually, I do have some sounds. And he was like, can we do something? And I was like, 100%. So a mutual friend of ours, Eraldo Bernocchi, which does Sigilon as like a mutual, he kind of like made the glue between me and Masai, and we did this project together. But it started out as one of those sonic experimentations that I had record way back, and I was like, I had to find like an old hard drive with those sounds, and then I sent it to Masami, and he was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm gonna try, to build something that comes out of nature into something more harsh. So
Scream and Writhe and Disaster Sources present the third edition of Initial Shock, taking place July 5th and 6th, 2025 in Montreal, Canada, featuring Mass Marriage, Death Kneel, Matriarch, Apologist, K.M. Tupfer, Anne F. Jacques, Shadow Pattern, Taskmaster, Nauseous Ejector, Lindsay Algieri, Gerzkel, Widdershins, Karaba, Mother Mary, Eunuch God, and many more. Initial Shock is sponsored by White Centipede Noise, Factor, Canada Council for the Arts, Untitled Zine, Rocker Magazine, CJLO, CKUT, Pizza Bouquet, and Pensione Popolo. Tickets available at initialshock.screamandride.com and at the door. Have you experienced over the years that people from extreme music will like connect with you or be, I don't know, either like excited or surprised that you get in touch with them, and like are, you know, because people know probably about your old work for a long time. I'm sure like you have a different history with people when they hear about your involvement in music or when you get in contact with them.
I mean, I'm a very active person as far as like, I contact people all the time, even if it's just someone puts a release out and I see that they have a place on Bandcamp that you can message them. And I just say like, hey, great work.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get an answer like, fuck off, it's not really you. You know, like, I don't believe it's you. And I'm like, actually, yes, I found you through, you know, your, you know, podcast or other people that keep me informed of good music. So I like that idea. Instagram also, it's another tool that it's quite nice to connect. Just send a message, say like, hey man, I'm a fan of your stuff, without expecting anything, you know. And that's how sometimes those connections happen, you know, like stuff like with Vomir, for example.
Sure, it blows a lot of people's minds. Like,
it's funny because they know me from something else.
Yeah.
They know me from the metal world, and of course a lot of people in the noise community or scene, they have their flirt with black metal, with extreme of punk or industrial. Right. So it all comes from somewhere else, you know. Like, and I guess I am somewhere in there. You know? So it can be sometimes a big surprise, or sometimes they don't even answer as well, which is totally fine. It's cool. Sure, and
I forget who it was. Maybe it was Vomir or someone else. But they were at the Hospital Fest in Osaka.
Yeah.
And they were like, dude, Iggor Cavalera was there, and he was fucking DJing, and it was super sick. It was super random. Like, they were like super surprised to see you there.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I'm also very, very good friend with Dominic. And every time Dominic does something, I always hit him up, and I was like, how can I be involved on this?
Yeah.
And he always be like, let me think of something. So the The second hospital they had in New York, I also DJ
Right.
in a sidebar they had.
Yeah.
Together with Justin from Godflesh.
Right,
Where
right.
he was playing like punk and I was playing like some weird stuff. And then Osaka was the same thing. I hit him up and I was like, Dominic, I want to go, but can I do something? And he was like, actually, what about if you DJ in between the bands playing? And the first idea actually was for me to play Brazilian black metal. Like go through,
Like the cat, like you're the DJ.
like like my old collection of Brazilian stuff. And he was like, is that cool? And I'm like, totally cool.
Yeah.
So I did a whole research on that. But then when I arrived at the fest, because I was playing on the metal day,
Okay.
and in between the bands, and I was like, I don't want to play metal again. They
Right.
just finished playing a whole, so I went into this whole, I brought a few drones and noise machines, and I started making just sounds in between bands. And that's where Dominic, like after like, I think 2 interventions that I did, he came up and he was like, man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I was like, actually, I unfollow what you told me to do, but it's working.
Yeah. Were you also mixing it with music, or was it just electronics?
I had samples and I have some CD like that I was doing loops.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really playing music. I was just generating sounds, you know.
Nice.
And that made a bit of a cool atmosphere because you had someone like, you know, like Blasphemy or Beharit.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to play another blast beat.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I was like, I want to make a weird sound that make people anxious. Because I also believe in building this tension between acts. I love like, I went to see Ministry long time ago in the 90s. And before every band, they were playing like this really bad country music, like hillbilly.
Yeah.
And for me, that was really well curated
Yeah.
because when they hit the stage with their stuff, they're extra amplified.
Yeah.
And it's the same if you go to see a noise night, and then in between the acts, maybe if you play, you know, some Italo Giallo music.
Right.
It makes it so much more special.
For sure.
And then when the other act comes in, you're like, oh, it's almost like you clean your palate.
Yeah, exactly.
In
I
between
think
food, you know?
That's really important. I think that can work so well. I think doing your own electronics is a great idea. But I think just in general, like, yeah, it's always I love noise. I can listen to it all day, but still when you have a live show and someone plays noise in between, or it's like, it just doesn't.
It's okay, but it's way more special.
Yeah.
If you have a little break, and then you get hit again with something that you really enjoy.
Yeah. You could do something. Also, you could do really weird things that really freak people out. I mean, I can imagine like playing like, I don't know, like something really disturbing, like some field recordings that would just be like, you know, like really bum people out before.
Yeah, I mean, I have some really weird, like I record a few like ayahuasca rituals where you can hear like animals and people throwing up, and it's quite like if I play that in between sets, it can freak some people out with also like ritual music playing and quite cultish.
Yeah.
So those things I find interesting.
Yeah. Do you have much experience with that type of stuff?
I do actually. Me and my wife, we do a lot of ceremonies. We done in Brazil. We done some in England. Mm-hmm. And yes, not only with ayahuasca, but also with different plant medicines. I mean, coming from Brazil, we were always exposed to this stuff. But then, of course, there's always like the tourist side of things where it can be very shady. Mm-hmm. Some people behind taking advantage. Mm. So if you find the correct people, the correct tribe to do it with the shaman, and it's amazing. I fully endorse this for everyone. Yeah. And it's not using as a drug to get high. Right. But something a little more deep for your spirit, you know.
You're doing well, tell me what you're doing tonight musically, because I'll see it soon. Yeah. But just give me an idea what to expect tonight, because I mean I've listened to some of your recordings.
Yeah.
And but I know you're going to be using drums and things like that. What are we expecting tonight?
So it's funny that we went into this a bit of a ritual conversation, because I find what I do, it's a bit of that. It's a little ritualistic thing where I find certain sounds that I enjoy, and I try to mix those things with things that I generate live. So I don't have a laptop. I have a sampler that I put those field recordings and such. And then I have a bunch of different machines, including noise machines that every night they sound different. So it's also a very cool challenge that sometimes they don't work as great as they do, which I love also the danger. I love going to see a live act when they're not just hitting play. I love to see the struggle. You know, like someone like, for example, I saw Suzanne Chani. She does a lot of like modular synth stuff, and same thing. She kind of like struggles to construct things, and you can see she's stressing, and I love that. Or even, you know, someone, I don't know, like Coil back in the days where they were trying all these things live, and sometimes they don't really work 100%. And I thrive on the element of danger as well. I think for a live performance, it's really important.
It is important.
Because I do love what people do in the studio, including myself. What I do in the studio is different than what I do here. But I think if I come out of my house to see something that it's a live performance, I want to be a little bit surprised. I want to be a little bit excited about it. Because I've been to certain acts as well where someone could be easily reading their emails. It's just a laptop and they're like, okay. And I appreciate what they did in the studio. But then that doesn't mean that I should leave my home to see this live. I want a live experience. I want something else.
I also feel like with noise, it's almost like wrestling with something. It's like you have some sort of chaotic element, and like I want to see the person kind of try to
almost like master, right? Like
master it like a bull or something like that. But you can't really
predict.
You can't really and you can't really contain it, but at least kind of guide it and do something with it.
And I think that's again one of the reasons that I find noise so special, because you also have so many variations. You know, like someone like Masona in Japan, which it was this huge explosion. And then you had someone like Linecraft, which is like this deep, very emotional experience. And then, of course, Genocide Organ with the full attack. So all those things, for me, it was fascinating to see in one night.
I bet.
And you know, and that's what I find exciting. Like when I'm in London, I always look to see if there's something happening. And also with new artists that I never heard. Not only the established things, but also things that, like I mentioned, Jesus Cremoso from Brazil. It was just this kid from the ghettos that was building his own things, and someone sent me a link, and I was like, "This is amazing,
dude! It's really good."
And
I looked for more about him. You know, it's like it's an example of someone who's doesn't seem at all to be tapped into this scene that it's kind of like the Western Europe, North American scene where everyone's on Instagram and everyone has the same labels. It's like he's doing something really good and really radical, but doesn't seem to be connected at all to this. And I'm like, man, like I'm gonna try to reach out to him for sure. It's like, there are other artists like that too. And I mean, it does seem like there are artists in South America that I think are really good. There's God Pussy.
God Pussy, of course, it's an amazing act as well.
And there are others that just don't get the exposure, or don't, I can only imagine must be much harder to do things, at least get them, at least in the same way that
I also don't know if, for example, I use always myself as an example. I always wanted to connect with people. We send our tapes to everywhere. Like me and my brother, we were saving money so we can send tapes to Norway, to the black metal guys, to America, but there's certain people that don't have that fire, and that's fine as well, and I respect.
Sure.
And
for sure. But it's interesting. It's exciting to think that there might be a network or a scene going on in other, just kind of brings you out of your kind of self-centered bubble to be like, there's people doing this all over for their own reasons.
I would love to. I always find fascinating to discover, like if there's a kid in Africa,
Right.
in a little living room making some extreme, amazing stuff, and
I'm sure there is.
sometimes I run into it and I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Or someone in India, like those things for me are super exciting,
Absolutely. What similarities do you draw between working as a drummer and a percussionist and working as a noise musician? Because sometimes I think of noise as being very percussive, and they're having some sonic similarities, but also the process seems quite different.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I do find percussion on everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm a very percussive person. Like even like if I hear a train, I find patterns of things. So when I listen to noise, sometimes I relate to certain things that I find beat related.
Yeah.
Even though they have no connection.
Right.
There's no beat, involved.
Right.
But maybe my brain is a bit more in the sense of like trying to make sense of a beat connection.
Yeah.
But I do, even if it's a completely harsh thing, I find patterns where I'm like, oh, I can follow this.
Yeah.
And it can be something, again, going back to ancestral things of mantras,
Yeah.
that maybe it's just us trying to be secure,
Right. Yeah.
holding into something,
Right.
when it's so we don't get completely lost.
Right.
So maybe finding those little loops
Yeah.
help us to be grounded,
Yeah. I even think like if you could listen to Valmir,
Yeah.
I feel like if you were to slow that down and like take like 1 second of Valmir and like spread that out maybe over 10 seconds, it would be a lot of like that harsh texture, even that wall would be a lot of like,
Yeah.
percussive jags. Maybe not in a repeating rhythm,
No.
but I still hear, if you really zoom in with your ears, you can hear
Yeah.
pops, granular texture in there.
Yeah.
And I see that I think that's like,
Yeah.
it does have a lot of similarities with percussion in some ways.
Yeah, and maybe because also the drummer, it's an instrument that you don't really attach so much to notes,
Yeah.
like the piano or the guitar or even the synths sometimes. So I think we are a little more attracted to that, where it's like with the drums, you make rhythms.
Right.
You're not thinking if this note works with that or if it arranges in a certain way, but you're just trying to make this work somehow. So I guess as a drummer, my brain connects a lot with noise in that sense, because it's like, I don't need those notes.
Right. Yeah.
I don't need the certain things that are being dictated for years,
But at the same time, with a drum kit, you have, I don't know, 10 or 15 or whatever, kind of a limited amount of points.
Yeah.
You can make them sound a little bit different, but they're your points.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing like, I assume you're using sort of like some synths and things like that, that's a much more fluid, it's not this step-based situation. It's like a fluid curve, and everything is fluidly. And that must be also a different process. Maybe like, do you feel like you've learned
Yes.
a lot from that, or was it kind of an interesting thing to transition to?
Exactly. I think it's a way also of detaching from both, because I do also things like, I always mention, I'm not really technically trained in certain, not even the drums. Drums I learned by myself, which is just my case. I think teachers are amazing. If you find the right teacher, it's awesome. I didn't have the luck of doing that, so I kind of like took my own path. So when I approach a synth or a noise box or even an effect, it's almost like if you give that to a monkey. That's how I feel.
Sure.
Really. I'm like, all right, I can watch a YouTube video but I'm not really gonna read this whole manual. And then it's funny because my wife, she tell me that I have a module or something, and she jokes that I have a Ferrari that I drive to the grocery store and back instead of taking to a real ride.
Sure.
Because I only use this much
Yeah.
of that, but it's enough for me.
Yeah.
And I'm happy with it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I ask everyone that I interview, what are their top 5 noise releases of all time?
That's a great one. And of course, you probably, as I see a lot of people kick themselves because they remember 5 other ones that they forgot, or they are blanking.
Yeah.
But I would try to go in a bit of a linear order.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will get completely lost.
Yeah.
But Brigada do Ódio, the one that I mentioned, the split with Olho Seco would be definitely my gateway into finding this attraction into noise. That's one of them. And then, of course, I have to mention Throbbing Gristle, because they were so pivotal in my experience of people experimenting with not really playing their instruments, but making something that it was radical. And I also have to mention Crass, which for me is one of the most important collective. I wouldn't even call them a band.
Right.
They're a collective, an art collective that's still to this day very active. And I'm lucky enough to have meet some of them and did a bit of collaboration with them. And I have to say, Asylum, it's definitely in my top. So I have 3 already. And then I have to go a bit, how can I say, a bit obvious. If I have to mention Merzbow, because he, in my opinion, he's the one, man. I mean, I've seen him live a few times. Wow, man, he blows my mind. And the last time I saw him, it was actually at the hospital in New York.
Right.
And I remember me and Lima, we were backstage, which was, you were there.
No, I wasn't.
No, okay. So backstage they had an area where you could still see the visuals from the back. And me and her, we just lay down on the floor, and through his whole set, it was like an hour of, almost felt like a waterfall. Because he wasn't really digging too deep into the harshness. It was more of him controlling this bless you, this white noise beast. And it was a mind-blowing experience. So Merzbow, I mean, Post Demon still, like, when it hits, I'm like, oh my God,
I think it's,
this is,
I think it's the best one.
It's a bit obvious.
But
my God, it's so good. Oh, and let me see. Yeah, the last one is always the tough one, because I know I'm forgetting a lot of stuff. What can I throw in there that I listen to on a regular basis that still touch me deeply inside? Maybe I'll throw in the Jesus Cremoso, like that EP that he did, and it's like also from like we were saying, from someone that it's not in the scene, someone that it's not exposed so much. But I remember, out of a lot of things that I was listening at the time, when I heard what he did there, I was like, man, this is deep. It really spoke to me. And I think those 5 records that I'm mentioning here, they're not like the best. They're, for me, the ones that touch me in a very special way.
For sure.
And I can probably keep going, sending you, I'm gonna bug you on WhatsApp. I'm gonna send you more and more top 5s, but out of my brain right now,
those are good.
Those are the ones that I would mention.
What kind of advice or wishes do you have for the world going forward in 2025? And let's say like the world in terms of like people who might be listening, in terms of artists, people in the underground.
Yeah, that's an important thing because I mean I've been doing this since, like I said, the early 80s. And I'm still excited about shit. I think that's it, man. You gotta be excited. You gotta have that passion, that fire inside of you. And I think that's the advice. It's not about how many followers. It's not about those numbers on Bandcamp. It's about that fire that you have. Because I remember, like, with the Sepultura days that we only had like 4 fans, for example. But those 4 fans were like really almost like a little cultish.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's at. It's not about numbers. It's about, like I said, touching someone in a special way.
Yeah.
And I think we are very privileged nowadays that we have so much information.
Right.
You know, but we also doomed.
Right. Yeah.
So those two things collapse.
Yeah.
In a way that we're also talking earlier about going to record stores and not just buying things online, but also connecting in a personal level. So I guess my biggest advice is don't lose that fire, don't lose that, passion, because that's what drives me, like to do this here and maybe tomorrow play with my brother.
Yeah.
A huge festival with a lot of people. And like I just did 2 days ago in Copenhagen, I was in a pub where people really didn't care when I was playing.
Yeah.
But then it was like I could see there was 3 or 4 people losing their shit, and I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
It's not about like having a massive hype.
Right.
It's about connecting with those 3 motherfuckers losing their shit.
Yeah.
And I went after the show, I was happy.
Yeah.
Because I could spot that, I was like, oh yeah, he knows what's up.
Yeah. That's amazing. I think that's amazing that you, you do a solo tour like this as someone from such a, I don't know, big and successful band that has a lot of, you could be doing something else with your time. You could be pursuing music in a different way, but that you're doing kind of a solo tour with kind of extreme electronic experimental music. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy this.
Yeah.
That's the main thing, I mean, like I'm pretty sure a lot of people that we connect, I can see they have that, they have that fire, and for me that's the key, because it sounds cheesy and it might sound hippie, but it has to come from the heart, man.
For sure.
Otherwise, fuck the hype,
Yeah. Igor, thank you.
Thank you so much, brother. Next time I'll come visit the store, man.
Yeah,
and
hopefully we'll be back soon and we'll...
Yeah, and I promise I'll bring a suitcase, because I will definitely be buying a lot of stuff, man.